Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the Russian oligarchs, what we don't know about rich owns. We're really pleased that you would like to spend this hour with us and discuss this important topic. And my name is Kira. I'm the Greens EFA coordinator in the FISC subcommittee working on tax. And along with me, I have also Ernest Urtasun, the Greens coordinator in the Econ committee, and with us today are a lot of great and knowledgeable experts. But to give a bit of a context, since the war in Ukraine started, countries have confiscated millions in Russian oligarchs' assets. But this is just the top of the iceberg, as you saw also on the screen behind me, compared to the millions of euros that they own offshore and that have been crucial in sustaining Putin's regime for decades. However, there is no real way to find out how much money these oligarchs have, and the lack of transparency both in and outside of the EU have enabled these obscure strategies that only favor the rich and the corrupt. And then on March 21st, the OCCRP launched the Russian asset tracker with media outlets that have helped us unveil scandals like the Pandora or the Panama Papers. And in just a few weeks, the project has already unveiled 17.5 billion in offshore assets. And if this has happened in such a short space of time, imagine what we could have done to stop fraudsters and corrupt oligarchs if we had an EU-wide system to know who owns what. And today with us as well, we have also one of the staff writer and senior editor at OCCRP, Ilya Losovsky. And besides this, as Greens EFA, we've put together a plan with a series of political demands for sanctions against Russian oligarchs. And one of the most important ones that we see is definitely the need for beneficiary owner registers, as it is the first step to stop money laundering and tax evasions. And today we will discuss the topic, what we can do and what the issue are. And I'm really happy that all of the speakers are joining us. And with us today, as I mentioned before, we have Ilya Losovsky, the staff writer and senior editor at OCCRP. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We have as well Helen Darbishri, executive director of Access Info Europe, joining us also. Thank you. And then we have Maria Martini, research and policy expert in corrupt money flows of Transparency International. And we have as well Claude Bokouras, I hope I pronounce it correctly, who is the deputy head of unit at the FISMA D2, responsible for anti-money laundering matters at the European Commission. And finally, we have Paniotis Nikoladios, the research director at the EU Tax Observatory. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look very much forward to hearing your inputs. And for that, I will leave the floor to Ernest Urtasun, as I mentioned, the Greens EFA coordinator, to steer us through this debate. And Ernest, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Kira, and thanks to all of you for being with us. I think we have an amazing panel for addressing the issue that we will discuss today. Thank you so much to all of you for joining. And maybe I will then immediately give the floor to Ilya Losovsky. So as Kira said, is senior editor at the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Also to tell us a bit about his views and about the project on the tracker. Ilya, you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. I'm really glad to be here to talk about our project. I'm not a policy expert like the distinguished other guests on this panel, so I'll leave much of that to them. I'll just talk about what we found in our project and why I think it's important. So at OCCRP, along with The Guardian and many other partners, we launched this project after the war began called Russian Asset Tracker. And as was introduced, the point of this project is to showcase the Russian oligarchs that have vast assets outside of Russia, to find those assets and to show to the world actually how difficult it is to find those assets. So we have right now about 11 oligarchs in the project, including their family members and some proxies who have these assets that have a total of over 17 billion. That's just right now. The project is live. It will continue to grow as we find more assets. I should mention that many of these assets were discovered earlier. We didn't discover all of these new. Many of them were discovered, in fact, by Alexei Navalny, the imprisoned Russian opposition leader, and his anti-corruption group. But we did also find some new ones to add to the list. But I think the most sort of frustrating and interesting thing about this project is even the assets that are very well known already, we made a goal of actually proving for ourselves and going through our fact-checking process that these oligarchs in fact own these assets. And we were pretty experienced with this kind of work, but even we were surprised at how hard it was to nail this down in many cases. I think this is probably best illustrated by a specific example. So out of those 11 oligarchs, I will pick one to talk about. That is Alisher Usmanov. He is one of the wealthiest men in the world, one of the top 100 wealthiest men in the world. Probably in the West, he's best known for being a big Facebook investor at one point. I think he bought something like $900 million worth of Facebook stock at one point. Later, he got rid of it. That's not the point. The point is he is very enmeshed in Vladimir Putin's regime. He has been... Alexei Navalny did an investigation showing how he provided luxurious homes for former Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. As someone who works in journalism, for me, probably the most offensive thing is that Usmanov is the owner of Kommersant, which at one point was a very independent and respectable Russian business daily. But as the owner, he has gradually neutered it to the point where today it's repeating the same official language about this special military operation and not calling it a war. And when Kommersant reported about election violations committed by the ruling party way back in, I think it was 2011, 2012, he fired several managers of the newspaper. So that's just one example. We have this crazy information environment in Russia. This oligarch is one of the people who's responsible for that. As I said, he owns billions in assets around the world, but we found it very hard to nail down even the most basic ones. And this is what I think the main thing I think our project illustrates. So for example, in the United Kingdom, there's a Tudor era estate called Sutton Place that is was worth something like $40 million when it was last exchanged hands in the 90s. Now it's owned by Usmanov. The UK said in its sanctions notice on Usmanov that he owns it. Even if you look at the Wikipedia page of this estate, it says Alisher Usmanov is the owner. But actually, the companies that own it are registered in Cyprus, and they are basically untraceable. And the Financial Times did a whole investigation trying to say, does this estate really actually belong to Usmanov? And they never really got to the bottom of it. And we traced these companies too. We found that these two Cyprus companies that own the estate belong to a trustee service. And then that's where the paper trail basically ends. And it's impossible to discover the ultimate beneficiary owner. In response to questions that we sent Usmanov, his representative confirmed that many of his assets, including his UK properties, are held by a trust that had been transferred from him. So they said he doesn't own it anymore. He can use it on a rental basis. And the beneficiary rights to that trust had been donated to his family. So I cannot even today answer the question, does he personally own this estate, even though everybody knows that really he does. Another asset is the famous Dilbar yacht, one of the biggest yachts in the world, currently moored in Hamburg, Germany. Usmanov's spokesperson said that that yacht also belongs to a trust. Whether it's the same trust or a different one, we don't know. The German authorities have had a lot of trouble sanctioning this yacht. In fact, as far as I'm aware, they still haven't actually managed to seize it. It's still there. But we wrote the Hamburg Economic Ministry. We wrote the federal German ministry. They both pointed to each other saying we are waiting for information from the other. And again, it's because these trust structures that reach offshore are basically impossible to trace. So perhaps formally the Dilbar yacht, which is, if you look it up, I mean, it has 2 helicopter pads. It's really an amazing, ostentatious vessel. It's formally belongs to someone in his family or his trust, but of course he's the one who earned the money. And I'll pivot from there to sort of my last example, and I'll let my colleague speak here. Speaking of Alisher Usmanov's family, one of his sisters is a gynecologist and obstetrician who lives in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, where his family is from. Her name is Saudat Narzieva. She has worked as a gynecologist for over 30 years and at a city hospital in Tashkent. So I'm sure she earns a comfortable income there. But in the course of a different project, we found that she owns 27 bank accounts. I'm sorry, not owns. She was the beneficial owner, at least at one point, of 27 bank accounts at Credit Suisse. And billions of dollars passed through those accounts. I mean, really a colossal amount of money. And in response to our questions, her spokesperson said that she doesn't know why she's listed as the ultimate beneficiary owner on those accounts. The actual accounts, most of them, we were able to connect to business structures associated with Usmanov. There's the information in, this was from a leak of Credit Suisse records. The contact information on those accounts is Usmanov's companies, but the ultimate beneficiary owner is listed as his sister, who is a gynecologist in Tashkent. So why is that? In another separate leak of suspicious activity reports that were filed by various banks, we saw that his sister, Saudat Narzieva, had exchanged various transactions of money with him. And the funny part is we found one transaction where he sent her several $1 million, and then several months later, she sent him money back. This is the gynecologist sending money to her multi-billionaire brother. And the note on the transaction said, "To the brother for current expenses." So it looks like the sister is giving spending money to the brother when the brother is the one that has, billions and billions of dollars. And there's a lot more, I can't summarize everything we found in our investigation. And this is just Usmanov. This is just one of the oligarchs of the many that we have in our project. And many of the things I just spoke about are only known because of leaks, because somebody leaked bank data or leaked offshore company records. We have the Panama papers, we have the Pandora papers, we have the Credit Suisse leaks, we have the FinCEN files, we have all manner of leaks over the years that enable us to put together a very partial picture of this wealth and how it's hidden around the world. And, we're journalists. We don't have enormous budgets. We don't have the resources that police agencies have. We don't have the resource that governments have. But it just shows that without these leaks, even less would be known and even more would be hidden. And just as a final note on Usmanov, we found 6 villas in Sardinia that are associated with him. Only one of them belongs to him directly. Several others belong to another sister of his. And several others belong to offshore companies that we were able, in the end, to trace to Usmanov, again, through leaks only. And there are more villas in that area that are all kind of together that belong to companies we weren't able to trace. And one of them led to Luxembourg. So actually, it might have been Liechtenstein. I can't remember right now. One of those two. But the point is, we don't even know. This might only be the tip of the iceberg, even for what we found. So I will end my intro there. I think that Usmanov example can stand for the value of project, both in finding these assets and in kind of showcasing to the world how difficult it is to find these assets, even in the easiest cases when you are absolutely sure an asset belongs to one of these oligarchs. And as for what to do with that, I will stop talking now. And I guess my colleagues here in the other organizations will talk about their views. And I'll be happy to take questions later if it comes to that.
Thank you so much, Ilya. Thanks for explaining that well, how also these family networks are constructed in a way that is difficult to track those assets. And also a question that maybe will come later, the role of the European tax havens in all these structures, which I think is something that we should, of course, reflect upon. Ellen, thank you for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Ernest. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon if you're in Brussels, I guess. I think Ilya's illustrated really well where we are right now and the challenges that we have. A lot of the data that journalists are trying to get access to has been collected because we have beneficial ownership registers, company registers, property registers. The challenge that we have as civil society is actually getting access to them. That's one issue. If the data exists and the anti-fraud bodies are doing their work, then all of this would have been exposed and dealt with already. That's not happening. And I think it's for precisely that reason, following all these leaks and scandals, that we've managed to gain a recognition in things like the EU's anti-money laundering directive that we should open up the register. The governments should create and open up registers such as the beneficial ownership register. The problem that we've got is that even where we've recognized the public benefit of doing this, it's slow and it's partial. So we don't have yet all the countries around Europe having opened up their beneficial ownership registers. There are a number of countries, Hungary and Italy still don't have a register. Cyprus, Lithuania and Spain haven't opened up their registers yet. There's cost issues. Ilya, you mentioned the cost to the journalists that budgets have or don't have. In Sweden, if you want to access the beneficial ownership register, it's nearly 12 euros per record. And if you're doing an investigation, you're going to need to access a lot of records. Legitimate interest is still required by some countries, such as Finland. You need to demonstrate a legitimate interest. And then when you actually go to search the data, to the extent that it exists and has been opened up, often you need to know something in advance to start your search. So to start searching in some of the registers, you need to know the official ID of the company. It's not enough to be able to search by the names of the owners. These are all practical obstacles that we have in the way of searching in the registers that we have managed to open up. There are a number of other registers that are still not yet public, such as the company registers, in spite of this being recognized in the 2019 Open Data Directive from the EU as a high-value data set, but we don't have the implementing act from the Commission, and many countries haven't opened up their company registers. And then all these complementary registers, land, property, and so forth, which journalists need to put together the full picture. Some of which you can access, but only upon paying a fee. So what are the problems that we need to address? One is to ensure that where we've got legislation already in place, that should be properly implemented. And I think that this Ukraine war has at least highlighted the challenges that the journalists are facing and perhaps brought to public attention the importance of this, because we're not only talking about Russian oligarchs, we're talking about kleptocratic cash flowing into Europe from multiple different countries and sources, and the negative effects that corruption has on development in many countries around the world. While this money is brought into Europe, and actually there's a risk that that also is used to pervert our democratic systems within Europe. On the question of trusts, that is actually an issue because we don't have the public having a right of access to trusts under the beneficial ownership registers. And that's something that I think that we need to look at and address. Perhaps what we also need to be talking more about is not only the what, but the why of we're having difficulty accessing this. And I think that one of the questions that we're seeing from Access Info is a raising of concerns about the legitimacy of journalists and anti-corruption NGOs having access to this kind of information. Isn't this really the job of the anti-fraud investigators? It shouldn't be the role of journalists and civil society to do these kinds of investigations. There are official bodies for that. What about the privacy concerns that we have here? We've seen these objections being raised time and time again. And I think we need to have a frank debate about what the legitimacy is here. If the anti-fraud bodies are not doing their work, and this crisis has highlighted so clearly that they're not, then in a democratic society, the legitimacy of civil society, be it journalists or anti-corruption NGOs, or even ordinary citizens who are curious because they've seen some local oligarch, if you like, or the best friend of the mayor enriching themselves in ways that seem suspicious, we should all be able to access this because it is part of ensuring that our democratic societies are legitimate, that we are able to know who owns companies and whether there is perhaps illegal or illegitimate activity taking place. So in order to get the political will to act on this, both for the laws we already have and to adopt the new laws on open data that we still need, and to remove the cost barriers and the other practical barriers to accessing beneficial ownership and other registers, we need to recognize that part of our defense of democracy, there is a huge legitimacy in journalists and civil society accessing this kind of information. At the same time, clearly a lot more money and resources needs to be put into the official anti-fraud bodies to ensure that they're doing their work. Because as we saw in the Open Lux investigation, it was discovered that a lot of the data in the Luxembourg the Luxembourg Beneficial Ownership Register was actually erroneous. hadn't been checked, wasn't up to date. So if we're creating these anti-corruption instruments but not making sure that they're properly effective, that's another reason we're going to have the kind of problems that we've been witnessing right now. I'll stop there for reasons of time, just as a quick intro, but those are some thoughts about the kinds of issues that we need to discuss. We know what the problem is. How do we move forward to ensure that we actually get solutions, that it's easier for the journalists to get information, and that we can avoid the kind of flows of illicit money into Europe that the Ukraine war has laid bare for everyone to see? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen, and also for pointing the lack of implementation of some of our legislation when it comes to beneficial ownership, lack of transparency, and, as you said, the legitimate role of journalists in that situation, which we fully share. Thanks for this. Shall we go now to Mayra Martini, a research and policy expert in corrupt money flows of Transparency International. Mayra, thanks so much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the invitation. Really a pleasure to be here today, and good afternoon to everyone. Yeah, I think I'll be kind of building a little bit on the things that Ilya and Helen just mentioned, but maybe also as a start, because we started by saying that the challenge in tracing those assets, right? And I think it's really important also to keep in mind that the challenges we are facing to trace those assets are pretty much the same issues that actually allowed the assets to be bought in the first place, or the oligarchs to invest their money across Europe and other countries in the first place. So the measures we are discussing now that are necessary to help tracing those assets are measures that would have prevented those assets to be bought in the first place. So I think we should definitely keep that in mind. And there is even a greater responsibility from countries in the EU and countries in the West of taking measures, because they allowed this to happen in the first place, and we should keep that in mind. But so before this meeting, I went to the Russian asset tracker, great job by OCCRP and partners, and I did a very quick analysis of the data that was published so far. So as Ilya was mentioning, 11 oligarchs, I think something like 149 different types of assets. So mostly, I think, real estate properties, but also some yachts, jets, and company shares. And only in 2 cases, Ilya mentioned one of them, but I only found 2 cases where the assets were registered in the name of the oligarch himself. In all others, so in more than 98% of the case, their assets were held through companies, and very often through foreign companies. So the asset was located in one place and then was owned through a company that was registered in another place, and sometimes in complex chains. So owned then by another company in another place, and so on and so forth. And then this, similar to what Ilya said, very often then, if any individual appears, because sometimes you do reach that end, you would find a family, a member, or a business associate in the end. So connecting the oligarch to the property in most cases was only possible thanks to leaked documents, as he mentioned. And this is because the information is either not collected by authorities at all, or if collected, then not made available to the public. So it's not a surprise when we analyze the list of countries. So that's what I did. I looked at where the asset is located, through which company the asset is owned, and where this company is based. And topping this list are Cyprus, Isle of Man, BVI, Cayman Islands, and Bermuda. You have also companies set up in some European countries like Luxembourg or Austria, but then owned through usually other companies in even more secretive places. So all the countries I just mentioned, Cyprus, Isle of Man, BVI, Cayman, and so on, have been selling secrecy. This is a business model for years. It has been a business model for years, and a very lucrative one for lawyers, corporate service providers, for example, which shows the challenge in also addressing the problem. And in some of them, there have been steps in recent years to try to improve beneficial ownership transparency. and but in none of them until now, the information is available to the public, which makes this exercise very, very difficult. And across the EU, and Helen touched on that, there is also improvements in the last year, thanks to the adoption of the 5th EU Anti-Money Laundering Directive, but also still significant challenges. And I think Cyprus is the perfect example of those challenges, but it's not the only one. So in May last year, we at Transparency International did an assessment of the transposition of the 5th EU Anti-Money Laundering Directive by member states. And what we found is that a year after the deadline for making these registers available to the public, 9 EU member states still didn't have a public beneficial ownership register. Now it changed a little bit, but we still have 4 countries that still don't have a public register. And in some of them, private register, not even a private register is fully functioning. So it means that if authorities want to check that information, they might actually not find anything. And again, Cyprus is another good example of that, because just earlier this month, they decided to postpone the deadline for companies to submit ownership information. So if you are hoping to understand who owns companies in Cyprus, you're still going to have to wait until at least until August to see whether this information will be recorded in the register, as they just postpone the deadline once again. And if we looked at the other countries where the registers are actually in place, we found also significant challenge to access this data. So Helen mentioned the costs, so the fees. Other key challenges are related to registration, because in some countries, if you are not national of that country or have a tax number of that country, you must also not be able to access the information in the register. So there are a lot of hurdles that one would need to overcome to be able to access the data in the register. And then there are other key, I think, crucial loopholes that keep allowing people to abuse the system, even if a register is in place. One of them, and we can get back to that if there is more time, is the issue of the definition. And I think it's particularly important if we consider some types of legal entities that are being abused. One of them is investment funds. So if we talk about private equities and hedge funds, the current rules as we have across the EU will not allow us to identify the end investor, so the people putting money into those funds. And it's not a surprise that if you look back at the asset tracker, you're not going to find money invested in assets in investment funds, because this is just impossible to trace. This is information that is not being collected by authorities, which will make very, very difficult to identify those types of investments. And then another crucial loophole that I think we can't forget is related to foreign ownership, because even inside of the EU, you can easily circumvent BO transparency rules by purchasing assets using foreign companies set up in a different secrecy jurisdiction. So it's time that we start collecting beneficial ownership of all assets. So when a foreign company owns a property in a EU country, it should follow the same rules. It should disclose its beneficial owner. If a foreign company owns a jet, a yacht, another luxury good, it should be required to disclose the beneficial owner, which is currently not the case. So just very briefly to finalize, I think thinking a little bit of solutions, there is something on the table at this moment being discussed by the European Parliament. There is the anti-money laundering package that was submitted by the Commission in July last year that contains provisions on many of those issues we're just discussing now. And there is an opportunity to strengthen those proposals, make sure that those loopholes are now closed, that registers will be open for free with easy ways to search, download the data, and so on, but also to close these other loopholes, talking about definition, verification, foreign companies, and so on. Those are all things that can be addressed by this package, and we shouldn't miss this opportunity. I'll stop here, but also happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mayra, for your presentation. Indeed, we have a problem with the implementation of IML in several member states, but that is not only the problem. Even those who implement them still have problems in being fully transparent with beneficial ownership. And yes, indeed, the foreign ownership is another big loophole that we need to address. Thanks for that. I will move now to Panos Nikolaides from the EU Tax Observatory. Thanks so much, Panos, for being with us. I'm sure you will be able also to address some of those issues, and particularly the role of European tax havens in all this. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being here with you. What a distinguished set of speakers you have today here. I think there are 3 points that I would like to make. And they correspond to 3 points made by Ilya. I think we all pick on his points, and he has set the floor very nicely. He mentioned 11 oligarchs, and then he mentioned how hard it was. And then the third thing, when he was mentioning where all the assets were, most of the assets were held in Europe. He was mentioning mainly European countries, either in the EU or in the European periphery in general. And so I would like to make 3 points that correspond exactly to this. The first is to bring a perspective on Russian wealth inequality. What do we know? About 10% of the wealthiest individuals in Russia own about 75% of total wealth. And if we go even higher in the distribution, the top 1% owns 48% of the wealth. That's half of the wealth held in Russia, basically held by the 1% of the population. Most of these assets are held abroad, which makes the problem significantly more difficult to deal with. And if we want to go even higher in the distribution, we have estimates of the 0.01% of Russian nationals, which are about 10,000 individuals, not 11, but 10,000 individuals who own 12% of total household wealth. And this is about 60% of this wealth. It's owned in offshore tax havens. So this gives you a scale of the problem in finding these 10,000 individuals, and not only the 11. It's very difficult from the NGO's perspective, the researchers' perspective, the journalists' perspective. The second point was the problem of how hard it was. Why is it hard? Well, it's hard to find both information and apply sanctions. And this is partly a problem of hidden information. Any difficulty in defining or applying sanctions in a systematic way, what we have seen basically from governments these days, is a testament to the information gap that exists in the ownership of assets worldwide. We don't know exactly what's owned. We don't know where this asset is held. And I think both Helen and Mayra have given very good examples of the different beneficial ownership lists that are currently complete or implementation not implemented. And this speaks at the heart of the problem. The third point was the mentions about Europe. It's mostly a lot of information that exists. We know a lot, and this is not, the information is not necessarily held in an offshore location in a tax haven. It is, of course, a problem of tax havens that are outside the EU, but already we have a lot of information that exists in the EU. And this, we think, forms a very good basis to make a start for a European asset registry. And this is the solution. I think if we want to be serious and address the problem of partial information that exists these days, we need a structure, a European structure that is geared towards setting up, gathering this information in a systematic way, so as to have a complete information structure and link beneficial owners to their assets. Judging from the responses of government these days during the war, I think it has been a testament of, on one hand, impressive unity, but at the other hand, a slow reaction in tracking wealth and in applying sanctions, just because this wealth is not systematically recorded. How can this take place? Let me give you an example. Basically, if we go 10 years back, when we faced the problem of the financial crisis in Europe, the EU leaders decided to set up a banking union. And they set up a task force to do the banking union, to coordinate all the actions by member states. And they have set this up in almost no time by European standards. In 2-3 years, a banking union was up and running, institutional structures in place, the European Stability Mechanism, structures in the European Central Bank, and new institutions set up. There is nothing to prevent EU leaders from giving a mandate to a particular group in the EU, the Eurogroup, for example, and setting up a particular structure, a task force that would work towards the implementation of a unified structure that gathers information that already exists in the EU. And this would be a first step towards making a European asset registry possible. Let me end by saying that this is not a Russian-specific problem. It can be easily tuned for sanctions if it includes nationality, but at the same time, it is an issue of overall justice, and it can also serve other purposes, like revealing hidden income, tracking in a systematic, automatic way, tax evasion and tax avoidance. I think it is a unique opportunity, and it is for responsible politicians and responsible individuals at the same time to address this long overdue issue of financial and asset secrecy. So let me end by this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Panos. And indeed, the problems that we are now analyzing when it comes to the seizing the assets and the lack of information we have, and in enforcing AML, it is indeed now a problem with Russia, but not only. We know this is a broader phenomenon that is going on in Europe. Thanks for that. I will now give the floor to Claude Boccaras, Deputy Head of Unit at FISMA. Thanks so much, Madame Boccaras, for being with us. Well, I think a lot of issues and questions are already on the table. We have a new AML package in the pipeline. So I am sure that you will be able to give us a bit of input on how the new package will also be addressing the loopholes that we are identifying. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for inviting us, first of all, and I'm very happy to be able to participate today. I heard many interesting things from the previous panel speakers. And I think I want to outline that right at the beginning of my intervention. We do share many objectives. So I don't know in which order I should start, because I don't want to follow the path I had envisaged. I rather want to address the questions and comments that you've made. So bear with me if I'm a bit chaotic. We already have a number of requirements in the existing AML legislation, and we share the view that implementation, in terms of implementation, we're not yet where we should be. There has been a number of exchanges with members of the Parliament on the efforts that the Commission is currently doing in order to make sure that what is already in the legislation is actually effectively implemented in the member state. And you can count on us. We are the first to be disappointed when we see that our legislation, what the co-legislators have agreed upon, is not implemented in the member states. So we have many cases. There has been exchanges in writing also with some members of the parliament. So I'm not going to give the numbers of cases on which pieces of legislation, but we're pursuing that in the AMLD framework, and BO is part of that, as you can well imagine, since it's a pillar of the legislation in the area of anti-money laundering. Now, Mr. Utterson, you mentioned that it's not only an issue of implementation because there are still loopholes in our legislation. You haven't mentioned which ones you had in mind, but I can already mention a few things. First of all, with the new legislative proposal, the AMLD legislative proposal that was adopted back last year in July, we're making a number of improvements in terms in relationship with the BO. First of all, we consider that further harmonization is needed. It will work if we have a harmonized and clear definition of control, if we have the same type of information that is gathered in the same way with the same definition all across the union. So that's the type of things on which we're working. Furthermore, and that's something that has been mentioned, I think, several times, we must make sure that the information is here and that the information is accurate, adequate, and up to date. And that is something that is again made clear in the proposed legislative package, with an addition, which is the fact that BO registry authorities, so the people in charge of the authorities in charge in the member state of the registries, will have powers. And we'll have powers to check the information, to check that it is accurate, adequate, up to date, to carry out on-site inspection, and to impose sanctions when the information is not here, or is incomplete, or is not up to date. Of course, again, the effectiveness, the actual implementation will matter. But we're trying to close some loopholes of the existing legislation. I'm not going to mention all of them, but there were also some hints to the non-EU legal entities. So here we're trying to enlarge the scope of the information, or the scope of entities that could fall within the BO, since today BO is for legal entities which are established in the union, and trustees and trust arrangement when the trustee is also established in the union. Now we will make it mandatory that non-EU legal entities that have link with the EU will have to register their beneficial ownership in the EU beneficial ownership registers. So we're trying to expand the scope. Now I want to. So having said that, I want to highlight a number of things that has not necessarily been mentioned so far. We're discussing today the role and possibly what could be improved with regard to the BU from the perspective of the anti-money laundering framework. But we should also see that. I mean, we do work in the EU with a framework which concerns privacy and the protection of personal data, and we are really at the corner or at the juncture between those two things. We want a robust system in order to fight money laundering, and there is an exception in the GDPR for public interest, and AML is certainly a public interest, fall under the public interest exemption in GDPR. But at the same time, we must see that there are fundamental rights and fundamental rights in terms of privacy, which have the same rank in terms of legality in the EU. And we have to work with that, and we have to provide for registries that are. I will mention some principle that is in our GDPR legislation. So proportionality and necessity, and we have to work with that. You might have seen the opinion of the data protection supervisor on the AML legislative package, and on the limited information that is required. Again, we have comments on necessity and proportionality. So we do have to work with two important frameworks. It is the AML and it is the data privacy. So some fundamental rights here. Now, I forget to mention a few things because that was pointed out by some of the panelists. It is the access by the public and it is the access for free. Here again, I want to say that the BO will be open to the public. Now, it is the member state can impose a fee, but the fee should not exceed the cost of maintenance of those BO. In addition, the BO administrators, they can require registration, and it's not because you give access to the public that you can't ask for registration. You need to know who is accessing the data. There's nothing bad about that. I need to understand if there's something bad about that, and the other thing is fee. Someone has to pay for the registries. So what is put in the legislation is that it should not be more than what is needed to maintain those registries. We all know that public budgets are very much tight. When we were working on that proposal, we would have loved to have much more public money for instance, AMLA. We don't. So here again, I'm completely open to see if there are suggestions to which we would not have thought. And the last thing that I wanted to mention, because this has been pointed at several times, yes, indeed, the beneficial ownership registry should point at the ultimate owner, so a natural person. And it's very frustrating when you consult and you don't find the information because you're faced with very complex legal structure. And I think BO is a solution for transparency. Definitely, we need to work on that. That's our purpose. But there are other things that must be done. And for instance, it's a better oversight of the non-financial sector in the area of AML, in the framework of under the AMLD framework. We all know that those very complex structures are established with the help of talented lawyers and accountants, and we do believe that enhancing their supervision will also be key. Now I want to stop here, and thank you again. I'm very happy to engage in the discussion with the other panelists now.
Thank you so much, Madame Bogaras, for being with us and for your reflections. Okay, we have 10 minutes, so I'll make the best use of those. I'll take a second round, so yeah, I will give you the opportunity to react to what you have heard, and also maybe to bring some new questions on my side. Ilya, if you want to react to what you have heard, and maybe I would also be interesting to know if you have a bit also tracked how the different sanctions are being enforced and performed in different member states, because I think we do have different situations if we compare different countries. So also I would like to know also, when you have been tracking the assets, what kind of mapping have you found when it comes to enforcing sanctions? Thank you.
Hi. So I really I think my colleagues here are probably more knowledgeable than I am about how different states are doing. I haven't been following that myself. I think one thing that struck me, again, as I've been listening to everyone speaking, is the question of like collaboration across states, because like the question is, you know, should this really be civil society doing this? Should this be journalists? Should this be police forces? Like, one advantage for journalists in civil society is we are pretty nimble, and we, you know, especially for a network like OCCRP, we always say it takes a network to fight a network. So if a criminal, you know, if oligarchs, criminals, corrupt officials, anybody who is moving money across borders is they're able to do so easily because they can pay for expensive lawyers to help them. It's sometimes much harder for any state, I think even the best intentioned state body or police force or, you know, agency to follow, because they have to collaborate with others who may not be very forthcoming or simply don't have the capacity. That's one thing that always strikes me is, you know, sometimes it takes so much bureaucracy just for one state agency to establish a relationship with another state agency in another country enough that they can easily share information with each other to follow this money. Whereas for us, you know, I can just pick up the phone and call my colleague in Italy who helped us track Usmanov's assets in, you know, in Sardinia, or someone else, or my Russian colleagues, or my Ukrainian colleagues, or anybody else, and we're on it. And it would be impossible to do this work without that. So that's one thing that comes to mind, is like, it's hard to imagine a world where this wouldn't be necessary. So I think we're gonna still all have jobs for a while, I hope. But we should have, you know, the resources to do them effectively. And in the U.S., there was an interesting initiative that corrupt money that was found by journalists would be made available actually to journalists or other civil society activists who helped find it. So that's a cool initiative that I hope will bear some fruit. About the specifics of, you know, where the assets are, I think actually a lot of them are in the UK, so that's outside the EU now. But obviously London is a world center. You know, even aside from the Russian oligarchs, we did a project recently that found $600 million of real estate in London belonging to the Aliyev family from Azerbaijan, who are no better than Putin, you know. And we even did a virtual walking tour on our website where you can click through and follow street by street and go, oh, there's this office building, there's this mansion, there's this bar, there's all of these there's all of these different so London is a destination, and I think that will, I guess obviously that's a different sort of process of finding that than in the EU. But, you know, obviously Italy and the coast of Spain is another destination that is very attractive, obviously, and not just for us, not just for the likes of us, but also for the oligarchs. So I guess I'll stop there and let someone else talk.
Thank you, Ilya, for that. Helen, the floor to you. What do you think are the 2-3 things that we must urgently fix in order to have proper transparency in beneficial ownership registries?
I'm going to pick up on 2 of the points that have been mentioned, including by Madame Claude Boccaraz, as issues that are being struggled with in terms of giving greater public access. One is the cost. Yes, there is a cost to setting up these registers, but you're going to do it anyway, right? So why charge the public a huge amount extra for having access? And compare the costs of the registers with the kind of mind-blowing numbers that Ilya has been mentioning. Isn't it really worth it, just giving the public access to this data for free? I think we're not looking at the full picture when we talk about costs. And the problem is that there's no transparency around how the costs are calculated for these registers, and I don't know how some countries are arriving at the costs that they're arriving at, which seem to me a little bit exaggerated. The second point, I've got more, but for reasons of time, I'll pick up on these 2, is the question of the necessity. Is it really necessary that the public has access to this information? Well, look at what's going on right now. Isn't it more necessary in Europe that we are able to know whether we are complicit in the use of money that results from corruption and is being used to perpetrate from human rights abuses to the most horrific war that we've seen in a long time? Isn't that enough in terms of necessity to reach the conclusion that we should be able to open up these registers. And does it really matter who's asking, whether they're a citizen, a journalist, or just some member of the public or a civil society group that's trying to check something? I think we've got our priorities wrong. If we're having these discussions about necessity, again, we need to look at the bigger picture and what we're trying to achieve here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Mayra, do you want to react also to all these issues, and also what are the key elements you think we need to fix on when it comes to transparency and beneficial ownership?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. Maybe I will quickly also on the point of collaboration, because I think there are a couple of things we have now on the table that we can build upon going forward. There was a mention to the AMLA, that is the anti-money laundering agency that is under consideration, that will hopefully improve supervision across the financial and non-financial sector across the EU. But there is still a need to improve coordination, collaboration, information exchange of law enforcement and financial intelligence units, right? And it becomes really clear now with Russia that they don't communicate enough. And the Freeze and Seize task force that has been now set up with the specific objective of looking into Russian assets is really a step in the right direction. And I think the Commission and member states should consider how to have that set up going forward to broaden the scope, to look at other kleptocrats, to look at cross-border corruption, and build on that. And going back to beneficial ownership, I think I would agree with the 2 points brought by Helen. And I would just add to that the issue of ensuring adequate resource to the beneficial ownership registers to and change actually their role, because they haven't been set up in a way that allowed them, they're not empowered to check, verify information. So I think that's crucial going forward, ensuring that they have the adequate resource, ensuring that this data is cross-checked with other data sets, and that countries promote the use of beneficial ownership registers internally, because we are currently also discussing with certain authorities, and we are shocked to hear that financial intelligence units across member states don't even use beneficial ownership registers. So I don't know what they're doing, what they're investigating, but it's quite shocking. Yeah, so I think that would be it. Of course, there's a long list of demands, and we could continue talking the rest of the day, but in the issue of time, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. Panos, the floor is yours. Maybe you can give us a hint on how the different member states are enforcing sanctions when it comes to seizing assets, if you have information about that. Thank you.
Yeah, not a lot of information about that. We have worked here mostly on the idea of the European Asset Registry. So in the last remaining minutes, maybe I want to touch on that. But quickly on 2 points, also building on the other speakers, the one on privacy. Even if there is an issue with privacy, which I agree with the points made by Helen, basically, but a unified structure with dedicated personnel that will be able to cross-check and not leave this job to journalists and NGOs, but do a consistent job, allow for the information to be collected automatically, and do the cross-check centrally, solves this problem of privacy. Of course, it is beneficial to leave others to check, but I think there are ways that can be found around that. The same with the cost. Let's reverse the question. What's the cost of war? What would be the cost of reconstruction of the whole country? How much would we give to military expenditure? Germany is increasing it by up to 100 billion. What is the cost of missing wealth, the revenue losses, if we extend the stop beyond the sanctions to Russia? These should be the questions in terms of cost. But I think, and let me close with this, these are the key elements that should be addressed, and we have issued a paper on this on the European Asset Registry that we believe should be set up. I know that the Commission has issued a tender for a work how all these databases could be linked. It was out last autumn. I don't know when exactly it will be. The study will be out, but maybe this is a chance to accelerate it and set it up as a small pilot parallel to the study, drawing from its results until we have the final structure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Madame Bogas, final word for you. There is one point maybe that I would like you to react, which is the enforcement of our IML framework in third countries, because we see many oligarchs using Dubai as an escape route for their assets. And I don't know how efficient is our legislation in being enforced in those situations. Thank you. And of course, if you want to react to anything that has been said, go ahead. You're muted. You need to open your mic.
Sorry, thank you. Now I want to outline again that we want BO to be. I mean, our legislation allow the public to access the BO. I mean, it's already in the law, and it will stay in the law. And I do see the comments and the thing that a fee could be perceived as an impediment. But so far, and bear with me that I count on the co-legislator to find a solution to that. But that is, yeah, the best we could do was to say that the fee should not exceed, as I said, the cost. Now let me turn to the asset registry was mentioned. Indeed, there's an ongoing study. It's ongoing. It does not preempt any future decision by the Commission. It will look at two aspects, and it linked to what I've said before. Not only the technological feasibility, but also the legal feasibility, the challenges that it represents to envisage a new asset registry of all sorts of assets across the EU for any person. As I said before, I mean, it touches upon fundamental rights enshrined in the EU Charter, and this needs to be considered as well. That cannot be disconnected from that. And to address your point, well, you might have seen that the FATF made a statement on the aggression by Russia of Ukraine, and the Commission has been fully supportive to that. In relation to FATF, maybe I should mention, so this points to the HRTC policy, but I should point out the fact that I go back to BO, sorry. There was an improvement to the BO, to the FATF recommendation on BO, making it basically, I'm going to simplify, but mandatory for any jurisdiction. And I think here I would like to outline something. We've talked a lot about the loophole of the EU legislation, but we must see that the EU is a front runner compared to other jurisdictions. And at some point, you cannot run alone when you fight when you want to fight money laundering. You need to work with other jurisdictions. If you do that in Europe, I mean, on alone, it doesn't work. We have to work with other jurisdictions. And that's why we have improved our legislation via the legislative proposal of last year, but most important, also important to us, is what the other jurisdiction does, and what has been done in the context of, in the framework of the FATF with recommendation 24 on BO is also key in that debate. I wanted to mention that before we close. Thank you. Now, sorry for being a bit long.
No, that was great. Well, thank you so much. We are 6 minutes over time. But thank you so much, all of you, for being with us this morning. I saw somebody saying in the chat that we need a follow-up meeting for policy recommendations now that we are going through the IML framework again. we'll do that for sure. So we'll invite you to maybe a session on how to put into concrete action what everything that has been said today, which was very interesting, very comprehensive. And I want to thank you, all of you, for participating. Thank you, everybody who has been following us in the last hour. And thank you, Ilya, Helen, Panos, Mayra, and Claude for being with us this morning. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ernest, to you. Thanks,
All right.
everyone. Bye.
Good afternoon. Bye.